Welcome to my channel Sleep Audio Stories. Thank you for watching. Video, subscribe, and like my channel.
Death Cell Visions by Jack Boyle, number 6606. The town is red hot, said K.Y. Lewis. And getting hotter, added Jimmy the Joke. There's a $5,000 reward for the arrest of one or all of us, gloomily from Cushion's Kid. Boston Blackie, their chief, took his pill of opium in a single draw and blew out the smoke reflectively. In the argot of thieves, a red-hot town is one in which outraged public sentiment has forced the apathetic police department to make a real effort to stop a crime wave. So the town's burning up, eh? Said Blackie. And there's a reward out for us, and that sack of diamonds buried down below. Well, what did you expect? Did you think the Chamber of Commerce was going to tender us a vote of thanks for cracking a safe in the busiest block of the main stem? Did you expect the mayor to invite us to a banquet? Of course the town's hot, and it's going to be hotter, as the joke said. From the tone the papers take, it looks as if it is up to the police chief to catch us or resign. That's just it, concurred Jimmy. They're currying this town for us with a fine-tooth comb. If they happen to spot this house, we all know what it means. We'll be lucky if even one of the four of us fights his way out alive. And you know, Blackie, that Pinkerton watchman got a good square look at you as you left the store. It's an even money that he's identified your mug in the Bertillon Gallery. Don't you think it's time to play checkers and move first? A week before, a sensational diamond robbery in the heart of the city, following a long series of similar crimes, had aroused the entire town. Businessmen's associations met and passed resolutions. The newspaper printed double-column editorials bemoaning the inefficiency of the police department, and the harried chief of detectives put his entire force on the case, telling the men, with a curse, to go out and arrest the safe blowers or prepare to lose their wings, which, in police parlance, is to go back to patrolling a beat. Meanwhile, the four men responsible for the furor lay under cover in a furnished cottage they had rented in the suburbs. Inaction under fire is the final test of courage, and although any one of Blackie's mob would have unhesitatingly fought against any kind of odds until he dropped, the strain of endlessly doing nothing was telling on overstrung nerves. It's hard for the deer to lie quiet in the thicket and listen to the hunters tramping the woods round about, but the wise old buck does it and remains a deer instead of becoming venison, said Blackie slowly. It's that way with us. Of course we're in danger here, but if we start to travel, hundreds will see us every day, where not one gets a glimpse of us now. If they have identified my picture, which is possible, the alarm has been set out all over the country. On any railroad train or street corner, we are liable to be tapped on the shoulder and turned to look down a gun barrel. I figure that there are nearly 40 chances of a pinch if we travel now, to 1 while we lie quiet here. I wouldn't mind swapping lead with a couple of coppers at that, boasted Cushions. He was rather afraid that his former remark had been taken as a reflection on his nerve. A quick wit beats a quick gun 9 times out of 10, son, returned Blackie in quiet censure. Remember that, and you're less likely to have a rope start you on your jolt underground. If I ever do have to go that route, it will satisfy my curiosity anyway, the boy bragged. I've always wondered what it was like to do time in the death cell. I've often dreamed that I was in one waiting to be topped, hanged. Maybe sometime I'll know. Blackie seized the pipe and passed it backward around the circle before another pill was smoked. It is the opium smoker's charm against ill luck of foolish boasting. If you're really so curious to know what it means to a man to be caged in a steel tank, counting the days and hours of life that he has left, I'll tell you. It may keep you from burning powder too soon sometime, said the gray-haired cracksman, after a silence. He hesitated before continuing. It isn't a thing I ever talk about. I've tried for years to forget it, and haven't succeeded. But I'll tell you the story tonight. It may do us all good, the way we're fixed. I did 3 months in a death cell once, and had all but eaten my last meal when a reprieve came. All of Blackie's companions stared in astonishment. As closely as they had been associated with him for years, not one of them had ever heard of this new chapter in his eventful career. I was sentenced to death in the electric chair years ago, continued the speaker. I wasn't guilty, but that's not essential now. The coppers made out a good circumstantial case against me, and the jury brought in a death verdict. As I lie here now, I can feel again what I felt that day when they took me up to the old prison that I never expected to leave alive. Hurry up with a couple of pills, Jimmy. It gives me a habit whenever recalling that day and the others that followed. They are like a brand on the brain, something that can never be effaced. It was early summer. The sun was bright and warm and beautiful. There were birds and flowers everywhere outside the car windows. Inside, handcuffed to the seat, I leaned toward the window and saw children playing, men at work in the fields, farmers on laden truck wagons, city folks in automobiles. Everywhere there was life, and I was going to death. Everything my eyes saw was for the last time. I would never again look upon these simple, everyday sights that now, since they were lost to me, for the first time seemed so deeply worthwhile. I remembered the executions I had read of in the papers. They had never impressed me very much. And now the thought came to me as a shock that my execution would mean as little to the outside world. They would read that I had died stoically, or cravenly, with a curse or a prayer on my lips, and forget me in the box score of the ball game. At the prison, all the preliminaries over, I was led across a beautifully flowered garden to the death house. I walked slowly beside the captain who had me in charge. I took a last look at the flowers and the sunshine, and then another, and still another. "That's right," said the old captain. "Take your time and get a good look around. It's your last chance, son." I shuddered and was ashamed of myself. Was I, who had always prided myself on my nerve, weakening already, with the day still weeks ahead of me? The heavy door of the death house opened, and we entered, and it closed behind us, blotting out the sunlight. I had said my last goodbye to life. I was glad it was over, for the strain was getting on my nerves. After being stripped and given new clothes, I was led down a corridor with cells on either side. Faces that seemed curiously yellow in the glare of the electric lights peered out at me from behind the curtains as we passed down the tier. There were 14 men there before me, all waiting, as I was, for one inevitable end. They put me in a cell with another condemned man. I threw my coat on the iron bunk and turned to look at him. His face was yellow like the others I had seen, and haggard. His eyes were bright and glowing, as if there were a flame behind. "When do you go away? What's your day?" he asked. "August 31st, I said. "My day too," he cried out. "We go away together. But maybe you've appealed, and will get a stay." The thought seemed to hurt him. "I don't have any money and couldn't appeal," I answered. "Oh, then we'll go away together. My appeal was denied last week." He seemed relieved. As soon as we had told our names, he commenced to tell me the news and gossip of our little world, For to men in the death cells, the whole world lies within the four walls that blot out forever that other world on the outside. A wife murderer was the next due to go away. He had refused to see the priest, and threw in the chaplain's face a Bible that had been sent to him. Another man, whose time also was nearly up, babbled secrets in his sleep, and was thought to be insane. "It is hard for a man in here to know whether or not he is sane," said my companion, looking at me intently. "Strange things happen in this place, things neither of us would ever believe on the outside. I'm glad they put you in with me. Either you will see what I see, or you won't. Either way, it will help me." "What do you see? I don't understand," I replied, puzzled. The suspicion that he was crazy grew in my mind. "You'll know soon enough," he answered, and dropped the subject. The long, monotonous days dragged wearily by. We were glad each time night came, and yet begrudged the loss of day. Each night left one day less of life for us. We read magazines, played checkers, tried novels, sang with the other condemned men, but no mental diversion ever removed the specter of the chair that waited at the end of the road we were traveling so swiftly. I remember one night I was reading an absorbingly interesting book. It was Père Goriot by Balzac. I read on and on, my eyes following the printed words on the page. My cellmate spoke to me, and I came out of my dream, realizing that for many pages I had not sensed one word I read. While my eyes traveled the lines of the book, my mind had been on the chair. I was wondering whether the cold, damp cap that was to be clamped over the shaven spot on my head would send a shiver through me that would be mistaken for cowardice. I threw down my book in disgust. "Hal," I said to my cellmate, "what's the use of lying to ourselves? Neither of us mentioned the chair aloud, but both of us are thinking about it every minute we are awake, and dreaming of it when we're asleep. What do you say if we quit pretending and talk about what's on our minds? It may help us pass the time." "You're on," he cried eagerly. "I've wanted to suggest it, but didn't know how you would take it." After that, we spent hours debating every imaginable phase of our approaching end. We recalled every printed account of an execution we had read. We argued the relative ease of death by hanging, by bullet, by electricity. We even made a sort of game of it in this way. I would say, "What will happen 11,520,000 times yet before we go?" You see, boys, I still remember even the figures after all these years. It was my cellmate's task to guess what I referred to. In this case, the answer was our heartbeats. Each of us vied with the other in inventing and computing these conundrums. Always, we selected something in which the answer was some gigantic number, running into billions oftentimes. It seemed to push the chair further back into the future to have such an uncountable number of units of each kind between it and us. We used reams of paper, figuring out how far an express train traveling 60 miles an hour would carry us in the days of life we had left. We estimated how far an ocean greyhound could take us in a round-the-world trip. We learned how fast the Earth travels, and worked out with painstaking accuracy the exact distance it would carry us through space before the day. We read a magazine article on a comet, which was said to be traveling toward us at dizzying speed, and learned how many round trips to the moon we had time still to make if we could travel with it. We made a table showing how many heartbeats and how many breaths were left us at the end of each of our rapidly dwindling number of days. And all this helped us to pass the time and keep down the ever-increasing mental tension. The wife murderer's day came. The night before, he refused to sleep, preferring the long torture of consciousness rather than to lose one of his precious minutes in insensibility. All night long we sang for him from cell to cell, hymns, ragtime, popular airs, everything. I recited The Girl with the Blue Velvet Band and Frankie and Johnny, but the old songs many of us had learned in childhood pleased best. Finally, dawn came, and the curtains were dropped before our cells, and at last they led the doomed human creature out through the door, from behind which no one ever returns. The chair was within 20 feet of one of the walls of our cell, and although we listened, dry-lipped and trembling, after the death party passed out, no sound came to relieve the strain of the frightful silence. It was on the day that the second man was electrocuted after my arrival that my cell partner broke down. After the last chorus of goodbyes had been shouted, as the death party passed down the tier, the door closed behind them. That terrible, unbreakable silence that seemed the very embodiment of death itself was upon us. We could have heard a pin drop at the furthest end of the cell house. Each of us was picturing that hidden scene so close behind us in the execution room, and each of us saw himself in the chair. At last, somebody coughed. The sound was like a blow. My partner cried out hysterically and tore at the wall with his fingernails. I picked him up in my arms and laid him on his cot, where he lay sobbing like a child. "Blackie," he cried, I can't face going to the chair knowing what lies beyond it for me." "It's hard, all right, partner," I said, "but what can't be helped must be borne, and none of us knows what comes after the chair. Maybe it's peaceful sleep. Anyway, you and I will find out together. We'll share whatever lies over there." No, we won't. That's just it," he sobbed, his voice rising in fear. "You haven't been hounded by his face like I have. You haven't even seen him, and he's been here many times since you came. His face will be waiting for me after the chair. That is what frightens me. I don't believe in God. I've tried, but I can't. But I do believe in what I can see, and every night the eyes tell me plainer than words that I shall have to face him when the chair had done its work." "Crazy as a bat," I said to myself, and tried to quiet him. But he babbled on and on about the face that had come and stared at him at night with menacing, unmoving eyes. It was the face of his partner whom he killed, he said. My bunk lay with its head toward the corner where the face appeared, he told me. He asked me to move it and watch with him for this thing that terrified him so frightfully. Of course, I knew the man was insane, but I humored him. Blackie smoked a pill and motioned for an extra one before he spoke again. The others twisted uneasily on the pallet. "Remember what I said in commencing?" the smoker went on in low tones. "I myself saw what I am going to tell. It was strange, there in the death cell, where mystery hangs like a fog all about. Told here before the four of us, in this daylight room, it seems unbelievable, and yet it is true. I know, for I saw it. Well, that night we lay awake, talking, and I kept trying to cheer up my cell partner, for he was terribly shaken, and I knew that there would be a frightful scene when the day came if he didn't regain his nerve. The lights in the cell went out, but those in the corridor shone through the barred door almost as brightly. The far wall of the cell was in shadow. Anywhere else there was light enough to read by. I don't know what time it was. Not late, anyway. There had been a silence between us for many minutes. Suddenly, my comrade reached out and caught my hand in his, like a frightened child seeking protection from something. His fingernails sank into my flesh until they brought the blood. "Look! Look!" he whispered from behind teeth that clinked like castanets. "See? He's coming!" I looked where he pointed with shaking forefinger. At first, I saw nothing. Then, so gradually that the transition was scarcely perceptible, the dark stone wall before us seemed to grow luminescent near the center. It was like nothing I had ever seen. It was as if the light came through the wall from behind, faint but unmistakable. I stared. Slowly, a change began near the center of the frame of light. Two spots more luminous than the rest appeared. They looked like eyes. My God, they were eyes. The outlines of the head grew visible. Then the face filled in around them. Icy perspiration ran in streams from my forehead. I wanted to, but could not turn my eyes away. At last, a whole face was there. A human face with stern, menacing eyes that looked straight at my companion, cowering beside me. The threat in the eyes pierced like a knife. There was not the slightest movement, not a flicker of an eyelash. In the terrible steadiness of the gaze, there was unutterable hatred and irresistible power. And then, as I stared, it might have been minutes, it may have been hours later, I don't know, the outlines of the head blurred and faded. The light that shone through the wall dimmed, and I found myself murmuring a prayer of thankfulness as I stared at the stone wall, which was once again its familiar self. My companion turned toward me, a face blue-white with emotion. After many trials, he managed to articulate. You saw it, Blackie? Now, tell me, was I right?" I nodded. I couldn't speak. "Did you ever see the picture of the man I killed?" I shook my head. "Then write, he cried. "Right now, a description of that face, as if it were a man you had met." I did as he wished, without understanding what he intended to do. As I wrote, blood splashed down on the paper. I looked at my hand. It was gashed to the bone by my partner's fingernails. I hadn't known it till then. When I finished, he rushed to the box in which he kept his letters and papers. Flinging them on the floor in his haste, he finally found a clipping from a newspaper. There was a photograph in the center of the page, and he handed it to me. It was a picture of the face I had seen on the wall. Every feature was there, absolutely unchanged and unmistakable, except the eyes. In the picture, these were more kindly. I have told you what they were like as they stared at us from the wall. My partner read aloud the description of the face I had written. With the picture before me, I could not have improved it. I had described accurately the face of a man I had never seen, except in that damnable vision. "You know now, Blackie, why I'm afraid to go away. It isn't the chair that terrifies me. It's what comes after," my partner said. He was calmer now than I. "You read the message in his eyes?" I was too stunned and paralyzed with surprise and fear to talk or even think. That I, Boston Blackie, should have seen such an impossible, miraculous sight in a place where human trickery was obviously out of the question staggered my reason. The barriers of unbelief were swept away by the certainty that I had seen proofs of the one unsolved mystery. I was like a little child beginning all over again to build up new beliefs on the ruins of those convictions which, until then, had been certainties to me. There was not an hour of sleep for either of us men in the cell that night of horror. The following day, my partner's wife came to visit him. It was next to her last visit. Our time had dwindled away now to something less than 20 days. A heavy wire screen kept her back from the cell door, but though she could not touch him, they could talk freely. She was a wonderful woman, of the same type as Three-Fingered Mac's wife, of whom I told you once. She was a firm believer in a life somewhere beyond the grave, where there was no such thing as sorrow and crime, and where those who had loved in this world met again in peace and happiness. Like a mother talking to a little child, this woman, with tears streaming down her face, sought to force the comfort of her faith on the unbelieving mind of the doomed man she loved. Each strained against the intervening steel that kept them from even so little as a handclasp. If there were ministers who could plead as that woman did, maybe there would be fewer men like us. But there never will be. A woman where her love is involved is inspired. She is more than human. She begged him in the name of their love to have faith that the chair meant only a reunion for them, a reunion where there would be no barred doors, no suffering, no sin, no death. "We'll meet each other there, my husband," she said. "If only—" "Mary," he interrupted, "if I thought the chair would bring us together again any time, anywhere, I would long for the day to come. But I can't believe it. I can't believe you will be given to me ever again. That will be my punishment. Someone is waiting for me there, though." Then he told her for the first time about the face of the murdered man as it appeared to him. His wife's face brightened as he explained. The light of some new and wonderful resolve shone in her eyes. She pressed her face to the wire netting and whispered to him like a mother. "Dear, dear boy," she said, "you have solved everything for us. Thank God you told me in time. You believe in that face you can see. You shall have my faith too. When the time comes, you shall go knowing that it is to join one who loves you, not hates." The guard came to say that her visit time was up. "Come closer so I can see your face once more, my dear, dear one," she said. "I want to see you smile again, as you used to in the little house we both loved so. Don't fret or worry. I will save you from all your fears. God has shown me the way. Goodbye, my love, for a little while. A very little while." Bravely, she kissed her hand, stretched it out toward him, and was hurried away by the assistant guard. That night, the face appeared on the wall again, exactly as before. The following night, it came again, and so the night after we came to watch for it, with a fearful fascination. The hateful eyes stared out at us, as menacingly as ever. My partner, who had been cheered temporarily by his brave little woman's confidence, fell into a terrible state of fear and hopelessness. It was awful for me to contemplate what I feared would happen on the last morning. On the 10th day before we were due to go away, the warden personally brought a letter to my cellmate. It was very unusual. His manner, too, was strangely constrained. "Read this letter," he said. "It's from your wife. I've got some news for you. I'm sorry." My partner held it up before his eyes, but his nervous hands let it slip to the floor. He motioned to me to read it to him. As I lie down here now, I can see every word of the letter as clearly as I did that morning. It was only a few lines. "My darling, when you read this, I shall have solved the problem for both of us. I shall have taken the one certain way to prove to you that my faith in the future, somewhere together, is surely true. Don't sorrow for me. I am happier as I write this than I have been since trouble came to us. Before you face the last ordeal, you will know, as I know, that it ends our separation forever. I have prayed that this knowledge may come to you and it will. I shall be waiting for you. Don't fear to come to your Mary." The man looked at the warden with terrible fear in his face. She's... He couldn't speak the word. "Yes, my boy, she's dead," the official answered. "Happened sometime last night. An overdose of morphine, they say." Her husband dropped on his bunk in a swoon that looked like death to me. I hoped it was. It would have been easier and quicker. They sent the doctor up and finally brought him back to consciousness. It's a strange thing that they will do anything at all to stave off death until they can kill you in their own way. The rest of the day was one that I still have to force out of my memory. I don't intend to put those hours of agony into words. It seemed almost as much a catastrophe to me as it did to her husband, that the brave little woman who had cheered us only a few short days ago should now be gone forever. Hours passed, and night came, and neither of us knew it. The warden sent a flask of whiskey, but it laid untouched on the floor. It must have been very late when we caught, both together, the first glimmer of light on the dark stone wall. We clung together like scared children. I'm not ashamed to tell it. Slowly it grew in the way that was now familiar to us. The cold eyes appeared, the head, the whole face. Once again we stared at the vision of the murdered man. And then, as we looked, came a transition. The unchanging eyes seemed to soften. The hatred died out. The contour of the face altered. The lines of the head melted into curvy waves of hair, and before our eyes on that wall we saw the face of the dead woman, my partner's wife. He fell on his knees, stretching out his arms to her. Her eyes, kind and loving and happy, looked straight into his, giving, as the others had done, a strange message that was plainer than spoken words. The kneeling man's eyes fixed with a sudden great hope. "Mary, Mary, my wife," he called. "I understand. I believe. I'll come to you glad and unafraid." The vision faded and was gone. He leapt to his feet. "Blackie," he cried, seizing my hands and clasping my shoulder in the ecstasy of his newfound hope and belief. "She's waiting for me. It's true, all true. We're going to be together again. I wish I could go to the chair tomorrow. No, now, this minute. I can't wait. Mary has saved me." No man has ever gone to the chair as that fellow did. Instead of fearing and begrudging the flying hours, he checked them off eagerly, impatiently, like a boy waiting for a long-expected holiday. Perfect peace and trust were in his heart. He was the one happy man I ever knew or heard in the death cell. And when the day finally came, they told me he marched down the corridor and through the little door, with a happy smile on his face and perfect love and trust in his eyes. That, boys, is what a woman's love did for that man. Cushions was very white, the others more solemn than usual, as Blackie finished. "Thank you, Blackie, for catching my arm when I started to draw my gun on the Pinkerton that night," the boy said reverently. "All I've told you tonight flashed through my mind in the second in which I decided to risk talk instead of lead," answered the gray-haired opium smoker. "It has saved me several times in similar moments of peril. That's why I told you the story. I felt I ought to." The heavy opium smoke all but hid the far walls of the room, but the men smoked on. The pipe passed round and round the circle many times. "Did any priest or scientist ever try to explain what you saw, Blackie?" asked Jimmy at last, as though there was no break in the conversation. No one ever had the chance. I never told anyone but you three, was the answer. I read once, though, that some professor laid an occurrence somewhat similar to what he called hypnotic thought suggestion between two overstrained minds. That's rubbish, though. I know what I saw. How did you beat the chair? Asked Jimmy, voicing the question each had been eager to ask. The man who really killed the Jew came through with the truth, answered Blackie. He wasn't such a rat after all. He was safe in Lima, Peru, and he wrote a letter confessing his guilt and telling that the gun he used was hidden in a hollow oak just outside the house where the Jew was killed. Its disappearance was one of the mysteries of the case. He gave its number and told where he bought it in a pawn shop. There was a lot of other corroborative detail in the letter, and the district attorney, after an investigation, was convinced that I was innocent. He laid the letter before the governor, who commuted my life imprisonment. I can still feel the sunshine on my face as it felt on that morning when I left the death cell for the open prison yard. 6 months later, the governor was convinced I was innocent, and he gave me a pardon. I left the prison determined to live straight. I was young then, but here I am, gray-haired and still a thief. How did you come to turn back? Asked Cushions eagerly. Blackie sighed. That's another and longer story, son. Sometime, maybe I'll tell you. Boys, we've all had enough hop. Smother the lamp, Jimmy.
From the Tomb by Guy de Maupassant. The guests filed slowly into the hotel's great dining hall and took their places. The waiters began to serve them leisurely, to give the tardy ones time to arrive and to save themselves the bother of bringing back the courses. And the old bathers, the yearly habitués with whom the season was far advanced, kept a close watch on the door each time it opened, hoping for the coming of new faces. New faces, the single distraction of all pleasure resorts. We go to dinner chiefly to canvass the daily arrivals, to wonder who they are, what they do, and what they think. A restless desire seems to have taken possession of us, a longing for pleasant adventures, for friendly acquaintances, perhaps for possible lovers. In this elbow-to-elbow life, our unknown neighbors become of paramount importance. Curiosity is piqued, sympathy on the alert, and the social instinct doubly active. We have hatreds for a week, friendships for a month, and view all men with the special eyes of watering place intimacy. Sometimes during an hour's chat after dinner, under the trees of the park where repels a healing spring, we discover men of superior intellect and surprising merit, and a month later have wholly forgotten these new friends so charming at first sight. There too, more especially than elsewhere, serious and lasting ties are formed. We see each other every day. We learn to know each other very soon, and in the affection that springs up so rapidly between us, there is mingled much of the sweet abandon of old and tried intimates. And later on, how tender are the memories cherished of the first hours of this friendship, of the first communion in which the soul came to light, of the first glances that questioned and responded to the secret thoughts and interrogatories the lips have not dared yet to utter, of the first cordial confidence and delicious sensation of opening one's heart to someone who has seemed to lay bare to you his own. The very dullness of the hours, as it were, the monotony of days all alike, but renders more complete the rapid budding and blooming of friendship's flower. That evening, then, as on every evening, we awaited the appearance of unfamiliar faces. There came only two, but very peculiar ones, those of a man and a woman, father and daughter. They seemed to have stepped from the pages of some weird legend, and yet there was an attraction about them, albeit an unpleasant one, that made me set them down at once as the victims of some fatality. The father was tall, spare, a little bent, with hair blanched white, too white for his still young countenance, and in his manner and about his person, the sedate austerity of carriage that bespeaks the Puritan. The daughter was possibly some 24 or 25 years of age. She was very slight and emaciated, her exceedingly pale countenance bearing a languid, spiritless expression, one of those people whom we sometimes encounter, apparently too weak for the cares and tasks of life, too feeble to move or do the things that we must do every day. Nevertheless, the girl was pretty, with the ethereal beauty of an apparition. It was she, undoubtedly, who came for the benefit of the Waters. They chanced to be placed at table immediately opposite to me, and I was not long in noticing that the father too had a strange affection. Something wrong about the nerves, it seemed. Whenever he was going to reach for anything, his hand with a jerky twitch described a sort of fluttering zigzag before he was able to grasp what he was after. Soon the motion disturbed me so much. I kept my head turned in order not to see it, but not before I had also observed that the young girl kept her glove on her left hand while she ate. Dinner ended. I went out as usual for a turn in the grounds belonging to the establishment. A sort of park, I might say, stretching clear to the little station of Auvergne-Châtel-Guyon, nestling in a gorge at the foot of the high mountain from which flowed the sparkling bubbling springs, hot from the furnace of an ancient volcano. Beyond us there the domes, small extinct craters of which Châtel-Guyon is the starting point, raised their serrated heads above the long chain, while beyond the domes came two distinct regions, one of them needle-like peaks, the other of bold precipitous mountains. It was very warm that evening, and I contented myself with pacing to and fro under the rustling trees, gazing at the mountains and listening to the strains of the band pouring from the casino, situated on a knoll that overlooked the grounds. Presently I perceived the father and daughter coming toward me with slow steps. I bowed to them, in that pleasant continental fashion with which one always salutes his hotel companions. The gentleman halted at once. "Pardon me, sir," said he, "but may I ask if you can direct us to a short walk, easy and pretty, if possible?" "Certainly," I answered, and offered to lead them myself to the valley through which the swift river flows, a deep narrow cleft between two great declivities, rocky and wooded. They accepted, and as we walked we naturally discussed the virtue of the mineral waters. They had, as I had surmised, come there on his daughter's account. "She has a strange malady," said he, "the seat of which her physicians cannot determine. She suffers from the most inexplicable nervous symptoms. Sometimes they declare her ill of a heart disease, sometimes of a liver complaint, again of a spinal trouble. At present they attribute it to the stomach, that great motor and regulator of the body. This protean disease of 1,000 forms, 1,000 modes of attack. It is why we are here. I myself think it is her nerves. In any case it is sad." This reminded me of his own jerking hand. "It may be hereditary," said I. "Your own nerves are a little disturbed, are they not?" "Mine," he answered tranquilly, "not at all. I have always possessed the calmest nerves." Then suddenly, as if bethinking himself, "For this," touching his hand, "is not nerves, but the result of a shock. A terrible shock that I suffered once. Fancy it, sir, this child of mine has been buried alive." I could find nothing to say. I was dumb with surprise. "Yes," he continued, "buried alive, but hear the story. It is not long. For some time past, Juliet had seemed affected with a disordered action of the heart. We were finally certain that the trouble was organic and feared the worst. One day it came. She was brought in lifeless dead. She had fallen dead while walking in the garden. Physicians came in haste, but nothing could be done. She was gone. For 2 days and nights I watched beside her myself, and with my own hands placed her in her coffin, which I followed to the cemetery and saw placed in the family vault. This was in the country, in the province of Lorraine. It had been my wish too that she should be buried in her jewels, bracelets, necklace and rings, all presents that I had given her, and in her first ball dress. You can imagine, sir, the state of my heart in returning home. She was all that I had left. My wife had been dead for many years. I returned, in truth half mad, shut myself alone in my room, and fell into my chair dazed, unable to move, merely a miserable breathing wreck. Soon my old valet Prosper, who had helped me place Juliet in her coffin and lay her away for her last sleep, came in noiselessly to see if he could not induce me to eat. I shook my head, answering nothing. He persisted. Monsieur is wrong. This will make him ill. Will Monsieur allow me then to put him to bed? No, no, I answered. Let me alone. He yielded and withdrew. How many hours passed I don't know. What a night, what a night. It was very cold. My fire of logs had long since burned out in the great fireplace. And the wind, a wintry blast, charged with an icy frost, howled and screamed about the house and strained at my windows with a curiously sinister sound. Long hours, I say, rolled by. I sat still where I had fallen, prostrated, overwhelmed. My eyes wide open, but my body strengthless, dead. My soul drowned in despair. Suddenly the great bell gave a loud peal. I gave such a leap that my chair cracked under me. The slow solemn sound rang through the empty house. I looked at the clock. It was 2 in the morning. Who could be coming at such an hour? Twice again the bell pulled sharply. The servants would never answer, perhaps never hear it. I took up a candle and made my way to the door. I was about to demand, "Who is there?" but ashamed of the weakness, nerved myself and drew back the bolts. My heart throbbed, my pulse beat. I threw back the panel brusquely, and there, in the darkness, saw a shape like a phantom dressed in white. I recoiled, speechless with anguish, stammering, "Who? Who are you?" A voice answered, "It is I, father." It was my child Juliet. Truly I thought myself mad. I shuddered, shrinking backward before the spectre as it advanced, gesticulating with my hand to ward off the apparition. It is that gesture which has never left me. Again the phantom spoke. "Father, father, see! I am not dead. Someone came to rob me of my jewels. They cut off my finger and the flowing blood revived me." And I saw then that she was covered with blood. I fell to my knees panting, sobbing, laughing, all in one. As soon as I regained my senses, but still so bewildered, I scarcely comprehended the happiness that had come to me. I took her in my arms, carried her to a room and rang frantically for Prosper to rekindle the fire, bring a warm drink for her and go for the doctor. He came running, entered, gazed a moment at my daughter in the chair, gave a gasp of fright and horror and fell back dead. It was he who had opened the vault, who had wounded and robbed my child and then abandoned her, for he could not efface all trace of his deed. And he had not even taken the trouble to return the coffin to its niche. Sure, besides of not being suspected by me who trusted him so fully. We are truly very unfortunate people, monsieur. He was silent. Meanwhile the night had come on, enveloping in the gloom the still and solitary little valley. A sort of mysterious dread seemed to fall upon me in presence of these strange beings. This corpse came to life, and this father with his painful gestures. "Let us return," said I. "The night has grown chill." And still in silence, we retraced our steps back to the hotel. I shortly afterward returned to the city and lost all further knowledge of the 2 peculiar visitors to my favorite summer resort.
The Headless Spokesman by Irvin Maddock. For the 6th time, Slater looked at the clock on the shelf. He took the axe from his knees and tiptoed across the rough floor of the cabin to a door of the adjoining room. Listening intently, he heard the deep breathing of a drunken man sleeping within. 20 minutes had passed now since his son Drayton and old settler Hurd had tottered across the big mess room of the hut, and each gone, dead drunk, to his own room to sleep off the hooch they had guzzled. The 3 men had celebrated the lordly haul of pan gold they had washed from the river that winter. In little sacks, the dust and pebbles of the precious metal were stacked under the boards of the mess room floor. Slater had put up to his son the proposition of removing old Hurt, but the son had refused to kill, had even winced at being the accomplice to such an affair. So, old man Slater gathered the 3 of them that night in a drinking bout. He sipped tea from a bottle. Slater had watched his son Drayton, who was unaware of his father's murderous plan, drink the hooch with settler Hurt from the big jug until the 2 men were beyond their senses and had reeled to their separate bunk chambers. And now, the axe in his hands, Slater stood before old Hurt's door, listening. Why should Hurt have 1/3 of the gold, when Slater and his own boy could have each 1/2 of it? What if Drayton was afraid to kill Hurt? A shot, a gun accidentally discharged, a razor-lipped axe falling from a bracket, and old Slater had chosen the axe. 20 minutes was an ample time for a boozed man to be fast asleep. Slater was now inside Hurt's room, closing the door behind him as cautiously and soundlessly as he had opened it. The room was inky black with the darkness, but a bit of good fortune was with Slater. Through a tear in the window shade of heavy paper, a single strip of moonlight shone, and this fell straight across the sleeping bunk. The sleeper's face was turned from Slater, and the moon lay approximately on the sun-browned nape of the drunken man's neck, just below the unkempt fringe of hair on his head. Slater raised the keen axe to his shoulder and slipped toward the snoring man on the rough wooden bunk, to within a full swing of the weapon. Like a huge chalk mark, the moon drew its white death line across the sleeping man's neck, and the next second a purplish froth bubbled in that line of light. Slater yanked the heavy axe from its dent in the bunk board. With another swing of the chopper, he left a blood-weltering slot between the head and the body. Then he stepped back to watch the gore from the torso mix with the oozing from the head arteries. A coagulating mass boiled and sputtered about the ribbon of moonlight where Slater had struck and beheaded a man. Then Slater turned to re-enter the big mess room. He wanted to pull up the floorboards and estimate very carefully the gold, which now belonged half to himself and half to his son. Someone knocked outside on the door to the cabin. Slater viewed the decapitated body on the bunk, then stepped back to the mess room. He saw the bottle partially filled with brown liquid next to a fat-bellied jug on the table. He started to take these away when the knock on the door was repeated. "Who's out there?" "Me, Slater. I just came up from the Forks to borrow some of your flour." Slater opened the door and admitted Yank DeParrott, another prospector in the region who camped 3 miles downstream. DeParrott walked straight to the table with the jug and bottle, and with a smile of greeting on his weathered face, he tipped the bottle to his lips and sucked one big mouthful from the neck, then turned and spouted the liquor from his teeth. "Damn it, what a swill! Pew!" Slater saw that DeParrott had taken a swig of the stale tea. "That's tea, neighbor. Whiskey's in the jug." "Tea?" "Yeah, I drink it sometimes." "And do you bottle it?" "When I make too much at a time, yes." Slater fidgeted a bit, trying hard to conceal his agitation. In the dim light from the single oil lamp on a bracket near the fireplace, the men looked silently at each other, only as men can look at each other in company where gold is scratched from the earth, and hidden again in rude huts where other men cannot find it. A door was banged shut in the cabin, and Slater stole a guarded glance in the direction of his son's bunk room. Then DeParrott laughed. "I know you've got a fortune hidden here somewhere, but I'm not after it. Flour is what I want, and I'll test the jug, too." DeParrott put the nose of the jug to his lips, turned back his head, and let a few gulps of the hooch gurgle into his throat. "That's more like it," DeParrott exclaimed as he put down the whiskey, satisfied. Slater shifted uneasily. He tried with his nostrils to smell if there was a trace of gore in the cabin. "Now, Slater, you let me have some flour, and I'll clean for home. My stuff's coming up from the post in 3 days, and I'll fetch it back to you then. And say, by the way, I dropped my axe into the slough this morning, and I'm out of wood. I see you're supplied for a time. Can you give me your chopper a few days?" Slater went to the covered box in the mess room and dipped some flour with his hands into an empty cartridge box. He was trying to think of a way to get the axe cleaned in Hert's room before handing it to Duperret. Why, here was an opportunity. The devil spawned a scheme in the prospector's brain. Duperret, here in Hert's cabin, just after the murder, his wheel tracks in the mud, the axe red with Hert's blood, found in Duperret's wagon. They weren't so technical up here in the Pan Country. Everybody knew that Duperret was poor, and that there was gold aplenty in Hert's cabin. The axe, and the murder, and Duperret's wagon tracks, it would look mighty funny. A smile crept through Slater's countenance, but died before it reached his eyes. Sure thing, Duperret. You can have my axe as soon as I tie up this box. By George, there's no string in the house. I strung it all up on a nail out in the stable. Take the lamp out and get me a couple of pieces for this box. I'll put the axe in your wagon while you're gone. Duperret took the oil lamp from its bracket and went to the stable for the length of string. Slater made sure Duperret was far enough toward the stable not to catch sight of the smear on the axe blade when he should run out with it to the wagon and put it under the seat. In the darkness, Slater ran to Hert's door. As he opened it, he looked instantly toward the bunk where he had left the murdered man bleeding. Settler Hert's body was gone from the bunk. In the full glare of the moon, now that the paper shade had been torn away from the window, Slater saw a pool of black, glistening matter stain the bunk boards at about the spot where a man's head would have been severed with the axe. But the bunk was unoccupied. Slater backed through the door, away from Hert's room. As he reached the center of the mess room, Hert's voice came deeply with a grave tremor from the shadowy doorway of the sleeping chamber. Milton Slater! Duperret, returning now from the stable, the chimney lamp flickering in the wind, called to Slater as he neared the door of the cabin. There ain't no string out there, Slater. Milton Slater, Settler Hurd's deep-toned voice boomed again in the darkness. Duperret came in and put the lamp on the table. He saw Slater in the middle of the room, pale and trembling. Then Duperret looked toward the doorway from which Settler Hurt had just called. In that oblong of darkness, the light from the smoking lamp chimney dimly lighting the gruesome thing, stood a headless body. It dangled heavily and awkwardly, as if weary from being propped up on its limp, rubbery legs. The top of the neck, a raw stump budding up from the bloody-shirted shoulders, was a horrible mass. A giant mushroom, it seemed, with a pastry coagulation of its lifeblood swollen and fringed about the headless stump. Just beyond the door, the awful thing swayed unsteadily, and then from its invisible throat came Settler Hurt's stentorian voice. Milton Slater, I have returned from the dead. I have come back from hell, from my bunk where you slew me. I have risen to accuse you of murder. Duperret saw Slater fall to his knees, saw his face turn stony, and his body shiver with a terror that transformed the brawny prospector to an abject, shriveling coward. Milton Slater! Hurt's words came as if from the pit of a grave. I come to throw the proof of your crime at your feet. Here, in the presence of one who will see that you are punished. Milton Slater, stand up! Slater was groveling now, clutching at the floor as one saving himself from drowning. Milton Slater! The headless body shouted. Stand up! This is your hour of judgment. Terrorized, Duperret helped Slater. Slowly the man raised himself from the floor, but shut his eyes, put his arms before them, and stood shuddering against the far wall of the mess room, straight across from the specter that confronted him. Look at me, the headless corpse commanded. Slater kept his eyes covered. Milton Slater, you coward! Look at me now! The man took his arms from his face, but held his eyes shut. Look at me! The headless specter screamed. Slowly, Slater opened his eyes and gazed at the awful thing. Then he picked at his face with ungoverned hands. Put down your hands, Slater, the decapitated corpse shouted. I can see you without my head. Put down your hands. Slater put his weaving arms down at his side. Duparrot beheld the sinister tableau. Then the voice of Settler Hurt boomed forth again with a finality of conviction. Milton Slater, now you shall be punished. Stand still and look. A moment of silence hung in the dimly lit cabin door. Then an axe swung out from Hurt's room. Through the air it flew, and clattered to the floor at Slater's feet. That's the axe you killed me with, Slater. Let Duparrot use it, but ask him first if he wants an axe that you swung clear through my neck. Through this neck you see now. Ask him, Slater. Duparrot saw the brown stain on the axe wedge. Another minute of silence ensued. Then Slater put up a whimper. Suddenly, a spherical thing, a lopsided ball with a matting of hair, was shot out over the headless body. From the doorway of Hurt's chamber it came, flying straight at Slater. The thing hit with a thud on the wall just above Slater's head. Then it came down, bounced on Slater's shoulder, and bumped to the floor. As the unwieldy shape hit the hard floorboards, it split open like a melon. Duparrot cried out, Slater, for Christ's sake, that's Drayton's head on the floor. That's your son's head, Slater. Slater shrieked and covered his eyes. When Duparrot again looked toward the doorway, the headless corpse was on the floor. Settler Hurt, gigantic, black with rage, his knotted arms bare and menacing, stood in the mess room beside the body. Slater was on the floor whining, clutching the hair of his son's shattered head. Then Settler Hurt let loose his words. Duparrot, he wanted the gold for his son and himself. He got us drunk tonight, drank some fake booze, tea or coffee, himself. I and his son were so full of hooch, we got our own room doors mixed. Drayton went into my room, and I into his. I woke up and saw my mistake. Going through the door between our chambers, in my own room, I found Drayton's body on my bunk, his head severed. I tore down the paper shade to make sure I wasn't shaky from the hooch, and there I found Slater's axe. Then I knew. Slater meant to kill me, and killed his son. It sobered me, that did. After I heard you were here, I did the rest with Drayton's body in the doorway. And now, Slater! Hurt curled his lips for a final imprecation upon the murderer, but the sight before him stifled speech. Old Slater, brushing his son's head, was singing a soft lullaby with a breaking tune that betrayed departing reason. Fondling the horrid shape, he planted a kiss on his son's ghastly lips. Settler Hurt groped for the whiskey jug and gulped as he watched the man on the floor. "Leave some for me," Duparrot whispered as he put his hands on the upturned jug.
The Chair by Dr. Harry E. Marinis, former physician at Sing Sing Prison. The minute hand on my watch indicates 5:44 a.m. I am standing in a direct line with the chair. My gaze is directed to the left side of the room and down a short, narrow, heavily walled corridor that forms the communication between the condemned cells and the execution chamber. There are a number of guards standing quietly about, and on my right, back of a rope stretched across the room, sit the witnesses. There is a tension in the very air of the chamber. Absolute quiet prevails. A few seconds pass, eternally long they are. Then comes a sound, a muffled goodbye all. The sound reaches the ears of the witnesses, and involuntarily they straighten up on their stools. There is some scuffling of feet, and one witness, possibly a trifle more nervous than the rest, clears his throat. Everyone is now keenly alert. I hear the chant of the priest, the response of the condemned man, the low, quavering, and broken response, "Have mercy on me." The little procession now enters the corridor. I see the condemned man, stocking-footed and with his right trouser leg flapping, grimly ludicrous, for it has been slit up to the knee in order to facilitate the application of the leg electrode. He is between the deputy warden and his assistant, each supporting an arm as they slowly enter the death chamber. At the sight of the fateful and fatal chair, the condemned man involuntarily shrinks back, but the guards are prepared for this, and their hold becomes a little firmer. There is no halt in their step, but 5 paces away, inanimate, portentous, and ominous, the chair. After the first sight, after that sharp, quivering intake of breath, the gaze of the condemned man shifts about the room. His expression haunts one. You feel that it is both all-seeing and unseeing. The fear of death, a definite emotion, is here portrayed in a fashion that but few have beheld. There is utter finality in that look. His eyes rest upon you. You feel that he sees you, but that you are simply one of the images in the general makeup of the last picture that is conveyed to his brain. There is no recognition in the glance, just a vague, hopeless, and apparently vacant stare, but one which you feel discerns the sharp outlines of the persons and objects in the room, without recognizing features or details. To me, that quick survey of his surroundings, that final glance of the unfortunate being on the very threshold of his meeting with his God, is the most harrowing of all the gruesome details connected with the administration of man-made law's decree. My watch indicates 5:45 a.m. The condemned man is seated in the chair. The guards work quickly, 2 at either side, and 1 at the head of the chair. The arm straps are buckled fast, the leg straps next, then the face strap, which has an opening for the chin, and the upper part of which mercifully blindfolds the eyes. The cap, a soft, pliable thing made of a fine copper mesh and lined with sponge, which has been moistened in salt water, is placed upon the head and molded to fit its contour. To a binding post on the cap is adjusted the heavy wire that conveys the terrific current from the dynamo in a distant part of the prison. To the bare right leg, another electrode is applied. A full minute has elapsed since I heard the goodbye all. The guards have completed their task. My notes now read, entered 5:44:10. Chair and strapped 5:45. Lamb of God, who taketh away the sins of the world, have mercy on me, chants the priest. And have mercy on me, comes the broken, almost inaudible, and inarticulate response. I retain my position, notebook, and watch in my left hand. I am standing on the right side of, and in the same direct line with the chair. The chair and its occupant, the electrician and myself, form a right angle. I occupy the angle, for at the ends of the lines which make up that angle are the two things that demand my undivided attention, the electrician and the condemned. From my point of vantage, I can see both. My eyes are on the condemned man. I feel the eyes of the electrician upon me. I have a new, bright yellow pencil freshly sharpened. It is quite necessary for my notes. I hold it vertically on my notebook and watch the occupant of the chair. The overwhelming mental tension, coupled with the knowledge of the proximity of death, has a fearsome reaction upon the chair's victim. With each rapid inspiration, there is a slight elevation of the shoulders, and as expiration takes place, the shoulders sag. This is the very instant I have awaited. The lungs are practically free from air. I drop my pencil quickly from the vertical toward the horizontal. There is a sudden click. The body in the chair straightens, and from the mouth comes a low, sibilant hiss. The straps creak, and you feel that if the straps should break, the body would be catapulted over the rope and amidst the witnesses. For 10 seconds, the high current of 1850 volts and 8 to 9 amperes is on. Then, for 40 seconds, the voltage is dropped to 200. During this period, the body sags perceptibly. At the end of 40 seconds, the current is again increased, and the body again straightens and strains against the straps. After the final 10 seconds of the fatal minute, the current is switched off. The body in the chair actually shrinks before your very eyes. I step up to the chair. A guard tears open the shirt and bares the chest. As I place my stethoscope over the heart, I am conscious that the body is intensely hot. I know from experience that the heat generated by the rapidity of the passage of the current has raised the temperature from subnormal to between 120 and 130 degrees. I hear a racing, tumultuous rat-a-tat-tat. Possibly I can count the heartbeats. I lift the face strap and with thumb and forefinger separate the lids. The eyes are glazed, but the pupils are small. I feel the great arteries in the neck. I continue to get a pulsation that tells me that the vital forces have not yet ceased. My notes now read, first contact, 1 minute, 5:45:10 to 5:46:10. I step off the rubber mat and nod to the electrician. The current is again thrown on, this time for 5 seconds. When I now listen over the heart, I am reminded of a clock that is running down. The heartbeats are fainter, they become slower, they commence to skip. I fail to feel the pulsation in the neck. There is a heavier glaze over the eyes. The pupils, small and contracted a moment before, are now widely dilated. The head rests on the shoulders, and the face is directed toward the chandelier with its many lights. But there is no reaction of the pupil. As the bright light strikes the eye, it remains wide and big. The muscles of the face are set, and saliva drools from the angles of the mouth. I again place my stethoscope upon the chest, but no sound reaches my ear. I listen for 5, for 10, for 20 seconds. There is nothing. All the vital reactions have disappeared. Physicians among the witnesses are invited to listen. They take their time, for there is no reason to hurry now. After the last one finishes, I make a final examination. It is as before, nothing. My notes now state, second contact, 5 seconds, 5:47, pronounced dead at 5:52. I turn toward the warden and say, I pronounce this man dead. The law has been obeyed. The general attitude of tenseness is relieved. The guards quickly unbuckle the straps and carry the body to the autopsy room, and after placing it upon the stone-topped table, begin to remove the clothes. The hum of conversation becomes general. The witnesses are departing. I commenced the autopsy, feeling that my report will be autopsy upon the body of number, convicted of murder, first degree, and today executed at this prison, showed all organs and tissues to be normal. As I begin my long sweeping incision, the thought always strikes me. This must also be done because it is the law. And the invariable question comes, is it really the law, or is it to ensure the carrying out of the law? In other words, if the chair fails, the post-mortem succeeds. There is little left to tell. The evening papers will state that so-and-so, convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, was electrocuted at Sing Sing prison early this morning. They will rehearse the gruesome history of the crime and will tell how the murderer, with firm step, entered the execution chamber at 5:44:10 a.m. and was strapped in the chair at 5:45 a.m. These details are quite correct. I can vouch for them, for I let the reporters take my notes, which are official, and they copy the data and embody it in their stories. They invariably dress up the first contact, however, so their stories read about like this. At 5:45:10, Warden Blank threw the switch, pressed the button, or dropped his handkerchief as a signal. It is always one of these three. Well, I'm rather glad that they credit it to the warden, and I really feel better that I and my new bright yellow pencil, freshly sharpened, have been overlooked.